Please take a seat and we'll get started. Thank you. Welcome. The reason for this venue is that the community building is having its floor refinished. So this is considered a public-private event on private property, and therefore the reason for the sign by the door. Hopefully that's not a necessary issue for anybody. I'd like to welcome the candidates for the upcoming election next Tuesday, the 22nd, which will be at the community building on the newly refinished floors, and we will do that. I had done my very best to offer even-handed and unbiased availability of timing and format to both candidates. Mr. David Fracht is the Democratic candidate and has agreed to come. Unfortunately, Mr. John Keane, the Republican candidate, has apparently declined despite repeated entreaties. We will start with a brief introduction by Mr. Fracht of himself and some of his priorities. I will take one question as the prerogative of the MC to get things started, but we want to have this as a conversational event. So back and forth. We will try to do this without amplification if possible, but if you feel that you cannot hear, please raise your hand and we will make the necessary rearrangements. Questions? Mr. Fracht. Okay, you can sit if you wish. Okay.
All right, so can everybody hear me? Okay, good. So I'm David Fracht. I've lived in Enfield for probably 14 years at this point in my life. I've been a resident of the Upper Valley for probably 30 or 35 years. It goes back further than I can actually remember. Since coming to Enfield in, I think it was 08 or 09, I guess it was 09, I've taken kind of an active part in the community. I've got on the planning board and have become its chair for the last probably 3 years, I think. Under my chairmanship, the planning board has produced the first master plan for the town in about 25 years. And that's only the beginning. We only did half of it because we were doing it in the middle of COVID. And it was very much a ground-up, citizen-driven, volunteer-driven effort. We did have a small amount of money for a consultant, and the consulting firm came on board probably for the last 4 or 5 months of the process. For those of you who are interested in the master plan, we will be getting underway on the next 5 chapters probably before the end of this year. The next project that we are starting to undertake on the planning board is a total rewrite of our zoning regulations, which are probably not 25 years old, but pretty close to it. And they have been called a hindrance to development by some. They certainly don't reflect what's on the ground. So we have a consultant, planning consultant, the same one that worked on the master plan, and that firm is just starting to begin work, and our anticipated completion date on that is about a year from now, and then we'll take it before the voters in March of 2025. And there'll be a good 6 or 8 months of public meetings and a chance for everybody to put their thoughts in so that we have zoning that reflects the needs of Enfield as it progresses in the 21st century. So, this is my first venture into elected statewide politics. I'm new at this, and it was never one of my ambitions to run for state legislature, but some of my friends with the Enfield and Mascoma Forward Democrats approached me back in late spring, thought I might do good at it, and with a little bit of arm twisting and whatnot, I agreed to do my due diligence and explore the possibility of what I would do if I was elected. I spoke with a number of people who are currently reps in the State House. I spent a day down in Concord, went to some committee meetings, and after much thought and gnashing of teeth, I decided that yes, I could probably do this job. I probably have the bandwidth, the time to do it. So I decided to register, and here I am as your candidate for state rep. As state rep, I will represent the needs of the town of Enfield to the best of my ability. And if I am elected on Tuesday, which, knock on wood, that will happen, as your state rep, I will be available. I want to listen to what you have to say. I want to hear your concerns. I have a list of my priorities, and for those of you who haven't received one of these cards in the mail or people who have been door knocking, I have to read this, I'm sorry. I support controlled growth while preserving New Hampshire's environment and the natural resources that surround us. I support universal health care and universal family leave where it's needed. I'm looking for common sense firearms regulation. I'm looking for I'm supporting women's reproductive health care. A big problem in the Upper Valley and New Hampshire and probably the country in general is a lack of availability of affordable housing and childcare. I don't have any answers to that problem, but if there's, I'm willing to listen and make the best decision for the town. I'm in favor of renewable power and community power, which will keep people's utility bills down and help in the transition towards green energy. And I also support a strong public education system. I myself am a product of public education from kindergarten to grade 12. My kids, who are grown adults at this point, also went through the public school system. And I have been endorsed by the New Hampshire NEA, National Education Association. So that's a little bit about myself, why I got into this, and where I think it's going to take us. And I guess we have 9 seconds left, so I will.
Good timing.
I will be quiet and let David entertain some questions.
Well, I'll start with the first question, using the prerogative of the MC. As the most junior member and if you are elected, the most junior member of the minority party in a very evenly divided House. How do you plan to be effectively representing those of us in the community, as well as your other wider priorities in the State House?
Well, being, the Democrats being a minority, that's the situation that we live in. And until that changes, I would say we're somewhat hamstringed. I would like to be on the County and Municipal Government Committee. It's my understanding that a lot of work in Concord gets done at the committee level. And I think that my interests and background and experience would prove very beneficial if I were assigned to that committee. Coming in midway through the 2-year legislative term, I'm not quite sure that I get a whole lot of choice on what committee I get assigned to, but I've got a couple of people that are going to lobby with the Speaker and the Minority Leader to get me on that committee.
Thank you. Mr.
I have one question to you. The statistics that I've seen coming out of Concord indicate that very few of the representatives are really showing up to vote on bills. I would like to ask you if you're prepared to promise the people of Enfield that you will show up to vote on bills that come before the House, regardless of whether they involve Enfield or not.
Of course.
Just a second.
Okay. Do you want to repeat that?
I will repeat questions from the floor because we are recording this for later distribution on the internet with Angus DeRoche's able help. So the question that Dr. Theis asked was, are you prepared to show up to vote on the issues that come before the House? Is that a reasonable? All bills that come before the House.
My intention is to vote on every bill that comes before the House, even if it doesn't involve Enfield specifically or my area of interest specifically. I think it's the duty of a legislator to show up and to vote. And I can imagine that there might be a circumstance where, I'm ill or there's a snowstorm or whatever, which makes it impossible to travel down to Concord. But for the most part, my intention is to be there for all session days and to participate.
Thank you. Next. Jean Patton.
I'm wondering if you get elected, sort of like what are the guidelines and rules surrounding if you will continue on the planning board in town?
Just a sec.
Okay.
Jean Patton asked the question about if elected, is there conflict of interest or limits on your participation in the planning board or other activities that you're doing for the town of Enfield?
As far as I know, there are no limitations. The only limitation would be whether I have the time available to participate in both planning board and as a legislator. I met a woman who was on the planning board in Lebanon, and she is also a member of the legislature as a representative. So from that, I take that there is no legal reason why I cannot maintain a position at the state level and on the town level.
There was another question over here, and then you.
Hi, I was a retired teacher. I'm very glad to hear about your MBA endorsement. I would like to ask you, since the role of the state in education is becoming somewhat contentious these days. I would like to know, as a fairly junior representative
And your name, please? Janice Peel. Ask the question of what your priorities would be, positions be regarding public education.
Well, one thing that I think is important is that public education be adequately funded by the state. I don't think it's realistic for property tax, the individual homeowners and landowners to bear the major brunt of supporting our public education system. I'm not in favor of public education dollars going to non-public schools because that just dilutes things in the public school. No applause. Does that answer your question adequately? You know, I'm sure there's a lot of policy.
I'm going to try and keep in order of the questions that I see offered. Your name, please?
It's Thomas Opal.
Thomas?
Opal.
Opal.
And I'm sort of in part adding some information. Not only is there no prohibition against someone serving on a municipal office as well as the state legislature, but in fact there's a new study out, it was in the New Hampshire Bulletin this week, that actually there's a declining participation among members of the New Hampshire House serving on municipal boards. And the feeling was that service was important in terms of informing their service in the New Hampshire House and sort of being able to cross that bridge between state and local and understanding the impact of what the state was doing, what local communities were doing. And I just wonder, David, if you might talk a little bit about how you feel your service on the planning board will help inform your work in Concord and vice versa.
Thank you. Mr. Opal asked the question that based on the study and I forget what UNH study showing that there was less participation in local boards among the legislators in Concord over the years, how you would use your experience with local activities and committees, boards, et cetera, to inform your performance as a legislator.
Tom, thank you for asking that. I would say that my roughly 20 years of experience on town land use boards, both in Vermont and now here in Enfield, that should say something. It's been my focus. I don't know everything. I don't know all the New Hampshire laws, but I'm learning them. And I think I will bring a perspective to the legislature that some of the people who have never served on municipal boards or committees can bring. And I think going through the process of working on a municipal board or several municipal boards, as some legislators have, it's good training because it gives you an idea of how to relate to your local community, how to discern the substance of an issue from some people who might be very vocal but a minority. And it gives you some idea as to how the body politic functions.
Madeline? So to repeat the question, Madeline Johnson asks, what local issues that you've been involved with do you see as important to carry to the legislature?
We've got two Davids here, it can be confusing. Well, as I said, I'm new to this game. I've been campaigning for about 4 weeks now. Because of my surgery, I haven't been out talking to that many people. So I'm going to kind of turn it back and say I have a blank slate, and my constituents need to tell me what's on their mind, and I will be available. You can contact me.
Mr. Rich?
Yeah, similar question, Brad Rich. David, you're obviously going to run across a lot of issues at the State House that you're going to have to vote on. But in your gut, what is the number one issue that you see faces the state and specifically
One second. Mr. Brad Rich is asking specifically, what is the most important issue that you see before the state and how that impacts Enfield?
I think housing is a critical issue in Enfield and in the state, and that covers a broad range of issues. What do people who are my age, empty nesters, what do we do with our 3,000, 4,000 square foot houses that we really don't want to keep up anymore? Are there places where we can move that are smaller and easier to take care of, where we can age in place and still stay in town? People who work in the area, at the hospital, at some of the businesses, they commute for an hour, hour and a half to get to their jobs. And that just, it's wrong. People shouldn't have to do that, especially for people that are making minimum wage or, some percentage above the poverty line. So I see that as a big issue. It's an economic issue, it's a social issue, it's a housing issue, and I don't have any answers. I'm willing to listen to any and all comers who want to, make suggestions. I don't think it's an issue or a problem that the market can solve on its own in any reasonable amount of time.
thank you.
Go to Charlie?
Not really following politics all that much, but is David finishing off the term of the person who's retiring for medical reasons, or does he have a full term?
So the question that Charlie had was, is this election to finish off the term of the previous representative from Enfield who resigned due to health issues following an injury, or is this for a full term? I'll let you answer.
The answer is yes. I think David just explained it. The previous rep did resign back in, I think, March due to a workplace injury, and he was unable to return to work, unable to do his duties at the legislature. Thus, the opening occurred for somebody to fill out the remainder of his term. So the select board, I guess, set today, or set Tuesday as a date for a special election. If I am elected, my anticipation is that I will be sworn in the Wednesday after Labor Day. I think it's the executive council, possibly the governor, that does the actual swearing in. And I will be attending any remaining legislative session days between the time I'm sworn in and the time that the second half of the session starts in January of 2024.
Could you speak up just a little bit?
Wendell Smith is my name, and I'm wondering on your last point, are there many or any significant differences between your platform, so to speak, and the interviewed party who left the job?
Okay. So, Mr. Smith inquires whether there's any differences in your priorities or platform compared to Mr. Adjutant's.
I don't know the answer to that question. We're both Democrats. We both support the Democrat agenda, and I would assume that there are not that many differences between the two of us.
I believe Mr. Rich had his hand up first. Is anybody who has not asked a question yet have one that we should address first? Mr. Rich.
Again, so earlier you mentioned the different areas that you support and on your card, all of which I think are great. But with income taxes and real estate taxes becoming a larger, ever larger increasing percentage of people's disposable income, especially people on fixed incomes, how do you think that some of the ideas that we've talked about tonight and are on your card, that we could pay for that? And so I'm curious as to where it come from the town or the state or what you're thinking.
So Mr. Rich is asking a question regarding some of the issues that are cost related to at a state level. Where do you see the financial approach coming from that would allow those priorities to occur?
Clearly, we can't keep going with landowners bearing the brunt of the burden. I believe that, businesses could pay more, and I think I read a study, I don't remember who did it, but there was a recent, rather minor increase in the business tax, and I think the Republicans were afraid that that would discourage businesses from coming to the state, and the analysis, once that tax was put in, and I think it's been in place for a year, maybe two, was that it just did not affect the decision process of businesses. So, there are a number of avenues. I'm not going to come out and say that an income tax or a sales tax are the preferred solutions or the only solutions, but I'm willing to take a look at proposals, and I would be in favor of proposals that can generate additional dollars for the state without putting the burden on the landowners. A lot of people are, as you said, on fixed incomes, those of us that are getting on in years, and the tax burden just keeps going up and up and up, and I don't think that's sustainable for keeping people in the state, and we want to keep New Hampshire as a multi-generational place to live.
Mr. Tice?
In regard to the previous person who held the position you're running for, he voted against New Hampshire becoming a convention state supporter. Do you feel that New Hampshire should become a convention state supporter?
Could you repeat the question, because I didn't hear it?
The question was, and I'm not sure I understand it, but I'll let you elaborate if it's not clear. The question was that the previous occupant of the seat supported a convention.
No, he voted against supporting the Convention of States by New Hampshire.
Voted against a convention, a state or a convention state?
Convention of States is a proposal to require, among other things, that there be term limits placed on federal elected officials.
Oh, okay.
There are a whole series of these, but the Convention of States is taking the opportunity away from the federal government to vote for it, which I don't think they ever will, and creating the necessity of 39 states voting for a Convention of States, in which case the state legislatures would decide whether the 25th Amendment would be passed.
So if I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the question is, would you support a federal constitutional amendment to make the, set federal term limits? Is that?
To allow the state of New Hampshire to become one of the signatures for the Convention of States.
Okay,
There
so-
are 19 now, and they need 39.
Okay, so there are currently 19 states that are supporting this constitutional amendment. 39 are needed for it to pass. I believe it's slightly over 2/3, 3/4, something like that. And the question is, would you support that sort of constitutional amendment approval by the state of New Hampshire?
I've actually been contacted by the national group that is in support of that. And with everything going on, I honestly have not had a chance to look at their position papers. Shooting from the hip, and I hope nobody will hold me to this, I think on the federal level that term limits for senators and representatives in the House are probably a good thing.
Okay. There was, Gene, you had one, and then you. Gene Patton?
Gene Patton, yeah. So I'm wondering if you had any thoughts or ideas how you plan to communicate to the townspeople in Enfield about what is happening in Concord, other than people getting online and digging through piles and piles of information.
So Gene Patton inquires how you will be communicating to your constituents here in Enfield without necessarily doing it through massive internet responses.
I have not given that any thought yet. Once I get elected, that will be one of my first priorities, is how to have a communication channel between the residents of the town and myself as your representative.
Harrison Drinkwater. I enjoyed reading the master plan that you and others have crafted. And in a way, it was the best illustration of the tremendous tension between getting development right, including affordable housing, and maintaining what we're all looking out through the window here, this gorgeous Enfield scenery. David, what have you learned by listening to people who participated in the workshops that will help you be more informed about whether you're getting that balance right?
Oh, go ahead. You want to repeat that?
Harrison Drinkwater inquires about how you will work to get the balance between development and quality of life here in Enfield, to paraphrase, and work with that.
I think on a statewide level, which as a member of the legislature, we need to recognize that one solution does not fit all. The needs of Enfield are very different than the needs of, say, Berlin or Salem. And I think the legislature needs to make a menu of choices available to the municipalities throughout the state that they can then decide what works best for them. There was a bill in either the last legislature or the one before that, which essentially wanted to impose, I think, quarter-acre zoning over the entire state. And, you know, that's fine for Salem or Nashua, areas that are developed. But if we said, you know, we want quarter-acre zoning in all of Enfield, I think people would be up in arms. There are places in town where I think it's appropriate, where, you know, we have the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, where denser housing could be supported. But to make a universal statewide edict that says any town must have, you know, quarter acre, half acre, whatever zoning in order to increase density, I think that's a big mistake because our towns are very different depending on where we are.
Thank you.
Yes, I think you, of course, have been involved in some ways with the CPPA, and I'd like to point out to everyone here, the most important thing that happened in this town, and because of the state, is that we are making a giant step on lowering the cost of electricity and increasing solar, etc. There will probably be continuing state-level activities. First of all, are you familiar with the process of CPPA?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, was it, continuing your question? That was a,
Have you been aware of it, and do you expect, as I do, that there will be important statewide issues still to be resolved, but that this is the most significant event in this town and Lebanon and Hanover that will really change the cost of electricity and the increase in what we call solar and
so I think the question that Mr. Wendell Smith is actually, and excuse me if I'm paraphrasing, is CPPBA is community power, the new electricity format that has recently come on board. One, are you aware of it? And two, what's your position relative to its ongoing process?
Yes, I am aware of it. I am aware that Enfield is one of the, I'm going to say, charter members of that group. I wish the heck that I was on it. Unfortunately, we signed a contract for, I think, an 18-month. So it's going to be probably a year and a half, whatever, before this other contract that we're on expires. And you'd better believe I'm going to be going on to it personally. You know, as I said in my opening remarks, I do support community power. I do support the transition to green energy, so-called. And, you know, if a vote comes before the entire legislature, I will definitely vote in favor of that sort of issue. I don't know if I would be on a committee that deals with that specifically, but it's definitely something that I support because New Hampshire has one of the highest electricity rates in the whole country. And I think, you know, legislatively and policy-wise, there's a lot that can be done at the state level to to bring down the burden of high electric rates. So yes, I'm aware it's a problem, and it would be one of my priorities to make it easy for towns to join a community power, and also change some policies so that the utility companies are not doing, they're just not doing a whole lot in the energy conservation field, and they don't really seem to be very supportive of green power.
I'm gonna go to Ken first, and
Tim Jennings, maybe I'm going to toss you a softball question, which is what I intended to do had you both candidates been here. I was saving the hot questions for the Republican candidate who represents the party that I don't even recognize anymore. In any event, as a centrist independent, I am anxious that our legislature work together with the governor, council, so forth. So I guess just as an opportunity for you to express some degree of recognition of the other party, could you tell us what, maybe just one thing that Governor Sununu has done right? Now, Sununu is a governor that's fairly well regarded in the state as a whole. I realize in the community of Democrats, like we probably are here tonight, that may not be the case. But in any event, I'm giving you an opportunity. You could make a flippant comment about it, or you can take it seriously. Just tell us what you think the governor's done right in the last 6 years ago. Thank you.
so Tim Jennings asks what Governor Sununu has, at least one issue that Governor Sununu has gotten right, and by extension, the Republican Party.
I think Governor Sununu did a bang-up good job during the COVID pandemic. I see a head shaking no.
We'll keep it as question and answer, please. We don't have another candidate to rebut that, but so we're trying to keep that. Madeline?
I have a plea, and I don't know what you can do on this, but I hope you can at the state level, do whatever's necessary to help us get better broadband service here.
So Madeline's statement, more than a question, was to do what you can do to get better broadband service here in our local community.
Where in town do you live, Madeline?
What?
Where in town do you live?
Down at the Shaker Boulevard?
Do you not have fiber running by your house?
Gosh, I don't know, I don't think so. I missed that if there is, yeah.
Or on floor A, can you imagine? And there's no cell signal, that barrier for floor A.
Yeah, there's no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody,
Can I respond?
Sure.
Okay.
Let Mr. Freck respond, please. It was more of a statement that there's broadband service and also cellular service in areas of this community.
Pledge to try and do something about this.
I would make that pledge. I don't know how successful I would be, but I think broadband service is absolutely essential in this day and age. I know there's a lot of federal dollars out there, and if the legislature can be moved to spend those to expand broadband, I think that would be a great thing. And to address Wendell's concern, there is a cell tower that will be going up on the top of Dry Bridge Hill, which will cover that dead zone around 4 and 4A. The planning board.
Wait a second.
Can I finish, please? The planning board did a site plan review on that about 2 years ago. And the tower developer, I believe, pulled a building permit within the last month or so. So I think we should see construction starting fairly soon.
Mr. Smith?
So there are cell towers at the head of the lake that are not being used for the purpose and could be. There are also small towers people place in places like that that are repeaters.
Is there a question there?
That's a question. That's a
Do you-
comment.
Okay.
That it doesn't have to wait 2 years. There's a cell tower that used to provide the service up on the hill over there, and there is a lot of small towers built around the road on people's chimneys or whatever that could easily fill that spot. And I think we ought to take the case to the providers of the service. If the town is having a real problem with emergency services, that they can't get in, you don't get either broadband or network. You don't get the cell either. You need both.
Okay. Is there a new question in that that you want an answer?
That you look into it or find out, because it's not requiring 2 years or a lot of money.
Okay, so Mr. Smith is reiterating that there's certainly gaps in certain areas of the town and asking if you would pursue that.
I certainly would, and I would hope that our select board would be in favor of that as well and provide some backup.
That was Charlie?
Having been a small business owner, how does that background, managing small business, will help you make your decisions when you go to Concord?
So Charlie asks, how will your past history of being a small business owner inform your process and effectiveness in Concord?
As a small business owner and working on projects large and small with other people's money, I'm very conscious of budgets and the fact that you really can't spend more than you have or can reasonably expect to take in. I think that's the chief lesson that I can take from running a small business. In my years doing that, I've learned a little bit about an awful lot of different subject areas, probably, well, too many to enumerate here tonight. And I like to think of myself as a reasonably fast learner. So I can take in a lot of different opinions and facts, and I think I can distill it down and look at the big picture and try not to get dragged through the weeds in the minutia of things.
You haven't asked the question yet. Name? Your name, please?
I'm sorry?
Name?
Ed Ripper.
Ed Ripper? Okay.
Rippy, yeah.
Rippy,
I'm
okay.
a resident who lives on Crystal Lake, and we recently had a flood situation where a lot of silt and a lot of debris and all sorts of preserve our lake, and what you might do to legislate, bring before legislature to help maybe with some cleanup.
So Mr. Rippey lives on Crystal Lake, and with the recent big rainstorms, that lake, as well as others, had considerable runoff and contamination, and he is asking what you would do to help with some sort of both preventive and restorative actions for that.
Well, as I'm sure you know, a lot of the damage to lakes and streams is a result of basically poor management. I happen to think that Vermont is ahead of the game in terms of best practices for runoff, in terms of road runoff and erosion. I suspect that we could learn a lot if we look to our neighbors to the west. In terms of cleanup, you know, hopefully the state would make funds available, but I wouldn't know what that process is at this point.
The governor has to declare a state of emergency, or at least in a county, to make anything happen with funds from FEMA. Is there anything you think you could do to help bring that about?
So the follow-up question was to qualify for FEMA funding, the governor or the county level leadership needs to do the necessary steps to make that request. Is there anything that you as a legislator would be able to and encouraging to do?
I would certainly lobby the executive council and the governor to investigate and make a thorough assessment of the damage and a thorough assessment of what it's going to cost to clean it up. And if that proves to be something that is at the level where a disaster is needed in order to get federal funds, I would certainly lobby in favor of that.
Dr. Tice?
Dr. Tice, I wanted to ask you, what prompted you to move from Vermont to New Hampshire?
So Dr. Tice is inquiring what prompted the move from Vermont to the Granite State.
Personal reasons and my inability to find housing on the other side of the river during the housing crunch and recession of 2008 and 09.
Go ahead.
Keith Thomas. I'd like to see what the state can do to enforce the laws that are on the lakes of people dumping leaves into the lake or blowing them into the lake or any kind of refuse into the lake, and also into streams that go into the lake.
So, Mr. Heiss, is it? The echo is Keith. What's your last name?
Thomas. My what?
Last name. I'm sorry. There's an echo in here.
Last name. Oh, I said it. I told you.
I know, but I did. It did.
Oh, okay. Thomas.
So Keith Thomas is asking about what you would try to do to have the state enforce current law that is limiting the blowing of leaves and other debris into lakes and streams in the watershed.
As Enfield's representative, I would gather documentation from lakeside owners, landowners, and I would bring that information before the appropriate agency, which I believe would be DEC, and I would push them hard to enforce the laws as they exist.
Steve Patton?
Steve, so I don't sometimes talk very well, but I'm going to start with a statement. So DES, Department of Environmental Services, is mismanaged, so they say they're underfunded. How would you work with DES to get them on the right track so that they can enforce some of these rules like Keith Thomas asked about? They are supposed to be in charge of all our clean water and our septic systems, but I know for a fact that they don't have the manpower they need. So the question is, how would you work with DES?
So Mr. Patton asks, given some of the shortcomings in funding and management that the Department of Environmental Services is encountering, how would you work toward improving those responsibilities?
That's obviously a thing that needs to be done by the state legislature, starting off at the committee level. I would presume that the way it would work is one or more legislators would be on a committee, and they would study the problem. They would advance a bill to the entire legislature, and hopefully that would pass. It would identify problems, possibly provide additional funding. But I think that's something that needs to be addressed through the legislative process by passing bills that perhaps further define what they're supposed to do, and making sure that they have the funds available to have enough people to enforce what they're supposed to do.
My name is Betty Clifton, and I have a question. There's so many immediate needs that seem to exist, but there are needs that are going to happen in the future that also have to be addressed. Things like the climate change, and I heard recently, I think on NHPR, that they're saying that children that are, elementary school children now are at such a higher propensity for living through catastrophic weather conditions. And I'm wondering, to what extent do you weigh those immediate needs with those needs that are coming down the pipe that are very dangerous and hazardous, and would also impact those immediate needs that, you'd want to solve now, but might need a different solution given further long-range problems?
Blanking on the name, I'm sorry.
Betty, last name is Plickta.
Betty Plickta asks the question, how do you balance some of these short-term crises, including weather events, et cetera, with potential necessary improvements that may be contradictory with long-term needs of our community and state?
Some of them may in fact be contradictory, some of them are complementary. A while back we were discussing community power and the transition to green energy, which has an effect on climate, which has an immediate effect on the amount of storms that we have, the severity, and also long term has a potential effect on on the climate of the entire globe. So I don't see them as mutually exclusive in all cases. And I think you've got to look at both the, fight the immediate fires, but also take a look at what you need to do on a long-term basis that will prevent the outbreak of lots of immediate fires. Does that make any sense?
The other great thing that happened this year is the merger of these two institutions, the Shaker Museum and the La Salette. Incredible possibilities being realized. One thing we talked about a long time ago at Shaker Museum was a cell phone repeater tower could have been set up in that group. Somewhere between La Salette and Shakers. Those kinds of things represent really good opportunities to contribute to the history and future of our town.
Is there a question that you have there?
Yeah. How could you see any way, or what should we do as a town to help make this important merger of two great institutions even more effective, including their contribution to all these subjects of energy, communication?
So Mr. Smith has asked, given the impending sale of the property of La Salette to the Shaker Museum and merger of many of the interests, how would you work to facilitate that and take that to additional benefit to the community?
That's an interesting question that you raise. I would think that that is more of a private landowner, private enterprise, business decision or set of decisions. Certainly, the town could be brought in to support, perhaps through grants, what have you. The whole merger thing, the buyout is still very new, and I don't know, at least I have not heard of any plans that the Shaker Museum has put forth other than they're going to start a capital campaign to help pay for it. But what their plans are or their potential plans are, I have heard nothing. But I think whatever the town can do, and if the state can get involved, through various grant programs or whatever, I think that would be beneficial to the town and to the region as a whole.
Susan Brown?
Susan Brown, can I say something about the merger? What's needed is money, and what the legislature, and the planning board, and the zoning board, and the select board, everybody has to think about is that La Salette has been a big economic engine for Enfield, and the museum is becoming an economic engine for Enfield. And whatever we can do, we need to support that. All we need right now is another $2 million.
Do you have a question? No. Mrs. Brown has a statement about supporting this capital campaign, but no additional question. Mrs. Buffet?
If I may entertain not having a question, but I'm sensing that people are leaving, I want to say something to Mrs. Grafton in this arena. As my experience with having you on the planning board, I have had many conversations with you over the years about different issues with the planning board that I was interested in, zoning questions that I had. And what I really have appreciated in you as a
Can I respond?
Yes.
To your comment,
Mrs. Buffet was thankful for your work on the planning board and other committees.
to respond to you, I would first of all say thank you. And second of all, I would say I would not anticipate any changes in my operating style if and when I'm elected. Same old, same old.
So not seeing further questions, I'm going to bring this to a close. I want to thank the Shaker Museum for providing this space on short notice and for free. It had its challenges, but it has worked well for this conversation, and I appreciate all of your attendance, of course. I also would personally like to thank David Lewis, who has been doing these beautiful windows that many of us have seen broken over the years. And this space was his workshop as late as about 3 p.m. So he cleaned up a lot to allow this to happen. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And Angus DeRocher has been doing the technical work and will be working on helping work on getting the recording of this out on the internet, and we will be providing a link hopefully as soon as tomorrow.
David, thank you for organizing these.
My plan is to continue with every election that I possibly can. Thank you.